Hi, my name is Basseri. I'm the CEO of Scalytics. I'm also one of the co-founders. We are located here in San Jose, California, but we have a global team. But before I get started, I'd like to thank the folks at Redis for giving us a time and opportunity to share with you the Scalytics AIoT platform, and more importantly, how we take advantage and leverage Redis time series in our own architecture. So with that being said, I would like to always start with a statement with an interesting data that might be useful to you. By 2025, there are going to be 41 billion IoT devices connected. So you think about the sheer amount of data ingest that's going to be coming in from billions of devices. In our view, IoT is the eyes and ears for many AI-based applications. So it's important, and this is really what we believe in, and that's why we sought to build an IoT platform. Because, like many of you, we want to not only be able to analyze what's occurring from the eyes and ears of IoT devices, but actually do something useful with that data. With that being said, let me cover the agenda today. I'll briefly talk about myself, a quick background about Scalytics, an overview. Some of the challenges we faced as a company in terms of our architecture. We'll go in a little more detail in terms of the IoT platform. I'll walk you through a demo and we'll glance at the results and we'll go in a little more detail. Talk about the next steps, what we envision. I'll point out some additional resources that might be useful to you. And finally, the takeaways or the tribal knowledge along our journey, what we learned and what we could share with you. With that being said, quick background myself, 25 plus years of enterprise deployments and support experience with numerous startups going back to late 90s, a small startup called BEA/WebLogic. I moved the clock forward to other enterprise solutions that were deployed. And most recently, in the last 10 years, been involved with cloud native deployments, specifically at DBM Cloud, which was centered around bidirectional object replication. And specifically, our passion here at Scalytics focused on AIoT and opportunistic models. And we'll talk about that in detail. And one important background on my career history, just like many of you, the last 12 months, I've also been the desktop support and Zoom specialist for a 6 and 8-year-old. So I'm sure many of you have that part of your career too, and I'm very proud of it, just as I'm proud of every startup or every company I've been involved with before. So a Scalytics overview, what do we do? What's so exciting about Scalytics? As I mentioned, we're passionate about IoT and AI. We do believe IoT are the eyes and ears of AI. We sought to build a real-time data analysis, managing complex AI workloads. We are also a firm believer in open source. Portion of our AI ops and IoT platform has actually been open sourced. Thanks to the folks of Apache Foundation, we're under their incubator program. So if you look for Wayang, is our AI ops that we have open sourced to the community. And you're more than welcome to download it and take a look. If you have any specific questions, come to us. And we also have a cloud native IoT platform with our partner that's available. But more importantly, what is it that Scalytics does? For us, our passion has been the following. We don't believe in the monolithic approach. The only thing I've learned in 25 years of technology is one thing is guaranteed is change. What works today might not be the optimal architecture a month from now or 6 months from now. For flexibility and scalability has always been a cornerstone, not only of my career, but really what we're doing at Scalytics. So in terms of big data solutions, if you think about back in 2007, the world was in love with Hadoop. That was the de facto story for big data solutions. Move the clock forward a few years, that wasn't necessarily the only solution available. You saw adoption of Spark, and a few years later, Flink, and other frameworks. So in our view, is an architectural AIoT platform that actually empowers the user to a wide variety of solutions without being landlocked to a single approach is actually the right approach. Because, as I mentioned, change is guaranteed. And you as a user don't necessarily have to go to a complete redesign and re-architecture. So we empower you to have an ability to be exposed to a wide variety of frameworks and infrastructure without actually the complexity of setting everything up manually yourself. And that's really our passion at Scalytics. So why Redis? Some of this stuff you already know, but it's very important to us, especially in the space we're at. Ultra fast and memory solution, frankly, best in class time series for compute and storage. We love the fact that has Avro and JSON native integration, native Grafana citizen, and an ultra fast mapping for key values. Those were all important in terms of what we're trying to achieve in terms of our AIoT architecture. So what are our challenges? So I talked about IoT, again, being the eyes and ears of AI. So a couple of things to mention here that's very important. Running real-time AI or analytics on data coming in from IoT devices can be complex because, frankly, IoT devices and sensors usually are restricted in terms of power consumption and compute and infrastructure, right? So they're not powerful enough for AI analytics. Coupled to the fact that AI algorithms themselves are not necessarily suited for IoT devices or on the edge, right? So you need to collect the data and run analytics on the cloud or on the fog. But you also have to keep in mind that data is coming in at fast rates. And you got high data volumes due to the nature of IoT. And by the way, this, we talk about getting to 41 billion devices. This complexity is only going to grow with time. So how do we approach this? You'll see our architecture. We go in a little more detail on the right. But a couple of things to cover here. What you're looking at is our IoT platform. I'll start from a top left. What you're seeing on the top left is IoT sensor fleet or data ingest coming in via MQTT. Terms of what you're seeing and the Scalytics Density, that's really how we manage. That's our front end in terms of our IoT platforms. Direct API to the storage layer. In terms of authentication, in this particular deployment, we utilize Octave authentication services. Again, you got full flexibility. If there's other authentication services you want to bring into play, absolutely, we could support that. But in this particular instance, what you're looking at is data coming in from IoT sensor fleet, and Scalytics Density stores that data from IoT devices in Redis time series. The Redis cache feeds that data to our Scalytics Lumina. And that is where magic happens in terms of our opportunistic AI model. It runs time series forecasting using multiple platforms to speed up performance. This is really our non-monolithic approach. You have full exposure to multiple frameworks. So what's great about that is now this allows Redis to work in tandem with other platforms. As I mentioned, maybe today Spark, maybe certain workloads needs to be a combination of Spark and Java or something else, or Flink, or the bottom line is you're not landlocked to any particular design, nor do you have to go through a complete redesign if you choose another framework. So how do we do this? How does our magic really work in terms of advanced analytics? So we have an ML model that's, by the way, part of this is available open source through Wayang, where we provide a cross-platform optimizer, right? We look at the infrastructure, we look at the framework, we learn from a class platform cost model using ML to select based on performance and cost optimization. And we provide the best platform for each task. And the other thing that's really a key value for us is the extended Redis API for the cloud. It extends to an ultra scalable time series, full cloud native Docker Compose included, enables rapid prototyping using Docker and API, and integrating Scalytics into an existing Redis cloud workspace. Those are all kind of the key advantages in terms of our overall architecture and integration. The other thing that's very important to us is when I talk about monolithic, non-monolithic approach, it's not just a framework, but also in terms of infrastructure. So, the magic is if you ask a data scientist, what's the optimal infrastructure to run their workload? What's the optimal cluster size? Is it 10 nodes, 1 node, 5 nodes? You don't have to answer that. We'll take care of that for you. And the answer is, what's the best cloud infrastructure to run that? Is it always AWS? Is it Azure? Is it Google? Is it GPU or a CPU? Actually, it could be a combination of all. And so Scalytics can suggest the cloud provider. We could actually suggest the infrastructure and the cluster size. And when we do this without the complexity of the data scientist and user actually knowing that infrastructure, we could do this dynamically based on our ML model. And the most important thing is that we could even do this at task level. So a particular job can actually be divided in subtasks and broken into multiple cloud providers, multiple compute layers. We could reschedule running tasks, and we could do this based on following dynamics, whether it's performance, cost, compliance, or things such as like data geo-sovereignty because of specific requirement you might have. So Scalytics, what's important is that we hide the details from the user, and we allow the user to focus on their logic and their applications. Don't necessarily have to worry about the complexity of infrastructure or picking the right framework or a combination of frameworks. So let's talk about a specific use case, what we have here in the demo. So let me set the stage so you have a clear picture, and then we could peel back the onion and go in a little more detail. So what you're looking at is input data from solar panels stored in a Redis as a time series. And that's important to monitor. So what you're actually looking at in terms of what I talked about our Scalytics Lumina, we read the data from Redis. We move the data in this specific demo, we move it to Spark for pre-processing. It could be something else, by the way, but in this particular example, we move the data to Spark for pre-processing. And then we predict the energy production using an LSTM neural network. If you don't know what that is, that's completely okay. And then we stored back that info. We stored back in Redis for real-time prediction. So let's glance at the results. So why is that important? So we could actually take live data that's coming in from the sensors and IoT devices, from the solar panels, ingest the real-time data, and utilizing LSTM, compare it to historical data, and actually give you an accurate forecast in terms of energy consumption and output. And that's important. And by the way, what I just described to you is not just for solar panels. This is also important for a number of use cases, whether it's LiDAR-based applications, whether it's smart counters, counting people, predicting how many people are going to walk through a particular gate or environment, or predictive maintenance, how efficient your locomotive is or your logistic application is. Same principle, very much similar architecture, but it's important. So what you're seeing on the bottom right is really where the magic happens, right? It's the model is actually working quite well in terms of prediction and actual values. So next steps in terms of milestones. Number one for us, make Scalytics ecosystem, including Redis, work in tandem with Qualys. Those of you who are familiar with it, you know what I'm talking about, but you could Google it if you're not familiar with it. That's very important for us, especially to support the Python community. And then number two is Redis AI integration. Again, those are two milestones that are critical in our roadmap. In terms of additional resources, again, I can't thank not only the folks at Redis, but also the Apache Foundation. It's a validation for what we're doing. So in terms of some of the stuff, some of the architecture I've discussed today, it is available on GitHub under Wayang, infinimesh. And of course, you could always reach out to us, and we'd love to talk to you. And anything I've covered in this presentation, we could even go in a little more detail. So what I call the takeaways, but also the tribal knowledge. What are the key learnings? So obviously, you realize by now that Redis time series is important to our architecture. It enables Scalytics to handle fast incoming data, that data just coming in from sensors and IoT devices, whether it's solar panels or other IoT-based applications. We have the ability to allow Redis to work in tandem with other platforms seamlessly. So again, a non-monolithic approach. As I mentioned before, the only thing we could promise you is change. What was the de facto solution 2007 Hadoop was not the de facto solution in 2011 or today. So maybe it's Spark, maybe it's Flink, maybe it's something else, maybe it's a combination of Java and something else. The bottom line is you don't want to necessarily go to a complete redesign every time a particular framework or an infrastructure is available to you. We enable you to have choices without a complete redesign. That's the takeaway. That's it. Hopefully you found this beneficial. And as I mentioned before, anything I covered here, or if you have any specific questions, feel free to reach out to us. And I appreciate the time. Thank you very much.